one of the things that's going to have to end up happening, especially if we're going to utilize AI for generative AI, that is that studios or even company that's going to use generative AI, they need to make it more so of using an LLM that's local to them. They're not going to be using it to scrape the internet to copy someone's work. They
Yes,
need to
they train it on
create
their
their
own
own.
stuff.
Exactly. They need to make their own library of works that they want to use AI to create. And that is your ownership to that, right? You're not going to be scared about any liability of someone's copyrights that you're copying from because it is from your own library that you're doing this from. I think that's more so what companies should just do just to be in the safe side. And then from there, that does take some work. Like you still need to have artists to build that library. So it's not like you're going to have an AI to create a library for you. You have to you still need to get human people to create that. My name is Emer Tanciatco. I've been working in the games industry for about 17, actually 18 plus years now. Now I'm still counting. I've been working mostly during that tenure at Sony PlayStation, working as an artist from multiple types of disciplines within art. Actually, I started at Sony back in the day when, oh my gosh, when PS3 was debuted. I was working on one of their flagship titles called Lair, of all titles, and I started as a texture artist, and then working from there, just going to just to make the long story short, just going through various titles in PlayStation. I've worked as a texture artist, gone into scanning like actual scanning real people and making body doubles and things like that. And then moving on to some character work and also some environment work. And then at that point, I started on the art side of things, working with external development. And the department that I was in was involving supporting all the first party studios at PlayStation. So I had a chance to really work with some of the other studios like Insomniac and Ben Studios. And there's a few other studios that aren't there, I guess you would call second party, that I was able to work a little bit with. One of them would be Kojima Studios. Uh, had a chance to work with Death Stranding and also with Arrowhead, starting off with Helldivers 2.
Well, those are some huge games, man. I mean,
Yeah.
my first question is, I guess, because I haven't had a chance really to talk to an artist yet. I've spoken to a bunch of different people in the industry, but when we met at GDC, I told you this would be probably the first episode where we discuss art. What
Yep.
does it take to build art for these like massive games? Because you mentioned like Spider-Man, Days Gone. I have also my list of games that you've worked on so many. Like, what does it mean to have had, I've had such a long career in,
Yeah.
in such prestigious games.
I would say, and this is just coming from the AAA perspective, because I did start on a larger studio, and it's really staffed, and they break down the process of creating art, to like various groups and disciplines and things like that. Unlike with indie, I think everyone wears a lot of hats, and like an artist would do a lot of things to some degree. What happens in a AAA development is that, they go through stages in production where, go with the pre-production where you're doing concept and things like that, and then deciding what that game's going to be. Within that, from the art side of perspective, is that things are decided in pre-production of what that art's going to be. Like we have an art director who's going to decide what this game's going to look like. What's the direction that this visual is going to look like for this game. Most of the things that I've been involved with at PlayStation, obviously you would know some of the big AAA titles like like uh Last of Us and Uncharted, really focusing on very, very realistic direction at this point, and it's a lot of that PlayStation kind of built in their DNA of how they want to make these AAA quality games. I had a chance to actually work with some stylized work. I mean, I had a chance to work a little bit with Insomniac on Ratchet and Clank, which is really
One of my
interesting.
favorite
But
games. Yeah.
yeah,
When I was a
and
kid, it was the best.
yeah, and they did a really good job as far as just making something stylized, but then in sort of a realistic rendering look to it, which is really cool. But as back to the question, it takes a lot of different steps to really develop the art. there's the first phase of developing what that looks going to be, and usually, and I don't know if they still use this term, but you would create this sort of art bible or art, um, sort of like an art direction resource for people to know this is what we're following, so that everyone in the team that's involved with art really follow that direction. And of course, we'll have leads and things like that that will really just drive the people in the team to really focus on making sure that art is at the right direction as it should be. And then, of course, there's the quality as well. There's the quality control as well, because we look for things that are really looking really detailed when it comes to games at PlayStation. So really sometimes, and this is really back in the day when people were really focused on really high quality detail, and sometimes it's a little bit overboard, I would say, because of the fact that you're making all this little detail, but the player is only going to see like 2 seconds of it or something like that, right? There's a bit of that concentration that's happening back then, but now moving forward to today, I think because of budgets and time and things like that, there's a careful like balance that you need to do as far as maintaining the scope of what you need to do for work for art, be able to get that stuff done within a deadline, versus like really meddling with the small details and really concentrating on whether or not this looks realistic or not. That's one of the things that I think that's starting to change. That's starting to really change to how we do things. um but other than that too, I had a chance to um not just work when creating art, but I had a chance to work with different teams to understand what that workflow is for their core development team. And just most of it to some degree is pretty similar in some ways, but they do have their own communication structures and workflows that are unique to them, that for me to understand kind of works. And then from that point during my journey, it's just learning how that pipeline works and what's more effective to really move forward with other projects that I would love to be involved with in setting up and organizing as well. But as a person who's joining AAA, just be expected that you are going to be working. I wouldn't say as a cog in a machine, but you're really going to be part of a team that's helping creating the art and assets you need for the game. And it's just really a collaboration back and forth on what that is. And depending on what your specialty is, you'll be within that discipline, whether you are more in environments or in characters, or even in VFX too. There's other disciplines like VFX. There's UI, things like that.
Yeah, I don't think. Well, at least I'm speaking for myself. Until I worked in an actual games team, I never realized how much artists have to actually do. Like the art team as a whole, when you have to build a game, like it's an immense amount of assets. Like you just listed 5 different areas where like you have to like hand draw or kind of do it on a computer, but you have to create these assets. And I think you mentioned, as you were just answering the previous question, which there is an element of prioritization. Like you can't waste your time doing
Yeah.
X amount of things that then, like you said, like in Last of Us, you go in the corner of an alley and there's a can on the floor and you spent 30 minutes of your day trying to make that can look perfect. But then you think, in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things, is that anyone going to see it? Am I right to say that there's a bit of that prioritization? That's the difficulty as these games like grow bigger and bigger and bigger, like maintaining a
Yeah.
bar of quality.
Yeah, I would say so. I think it really is whether or not the mindset of the team is where they're at. I mean, I'm not going to, I will probably mention it later, but I think one of the experiences I have is really some of those studios are really more dead set on maintaining that quality. I like it, whether or not it's going to be in the game in 5 seconds or 30 minutes. It's just going to be, they want to maintain that level of quality to any degree, just to show that that's the degree of what they really focus on making the game, which, I would say that's kind of, cool in some ways, because, that's what they want to focus on that level. But realistically, when it comes to like budgets and time, again, like I said, that balance has to be made. There's got to be some point where you need to give and say, you know what, you don't need to spend this much time to make this much detail on this. It's there's cost, there's time that we have to worry about, and that's the thing that unless you're really willing to spend that amount of money, and obviously the other cost is human cost as well. You got to be careful about,
Yeah,
because
burnout.
burnout can happen. So that's a really bigger concern too.
And it's quite strong with artists, like, because it's hard. Like you're producing art, you have like a certain degree of quality. I think even I think any engineer, anyone doing a certain degree of work, you have attachment to it. You have a reputation. You believe in the game. You want it to look like at a certain level. Like there's just so much pressure on having to deliver so many different pieces of asset depending on what you're specialized in. And
Yeah.
I like how you, and I mean, I totally agree with what you brought up about the human cost as much as kind of the economic cost of supporting all this art. Um, it's not an easy discipline. Like I've never been good at art, and I look at artists, and when I worked even in a small mobile game studio, I remember my director of my director of art was like, he was just working, burning the midnight oil, trying to make all these assets, just trying to make things work and just putting things together. And I just thought, like, what a absolute hero. Because like without that, what do you do? Like that's the things that the players see, right? Like there's
Yeah.
no game without art, fundamentally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, well, do you have like any stories about like working on some of these? I know you said you wanted to mention it later, but I guess like while we're here, like any like big stories of working on on a big game and like lessons you learned along the way. I think anyone is listening would love to understand more like what it takes to do art like for big games and maybe just how it was then and how it is now. Like it's just you pick. I don't know.
Yeah. So one thing I'll probably bring up, and this is an experience I had with the studio. I won't mention it yet till later, but
Of
one of
course.
the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
things that, yeah, one of the things that really is the focus of the major focus really is just to make it look realistic and believable. And
Mm,
the assets that we are creating are building assets, and these are buildings that are going to be destroyed, and they'll have exposed, broken concrete, and exposed like inner bits of the concrete, like what's it called? There's the metal that's actually inside when you're creating like reinforced concrete, all that stuff that builds up in there. And this is post-apocalyptic, by the way. So you have to consider when it was destroyed, what's that setting, what's the environment looking like. All those things need to matter when you create these assets. A lot of times, some of the workflows that we would learn, and maybe this is maybe taught in some schools as well too, is this, sometimes there's ways to make shortcuts and ways to make things tileable to make it look the way it should, but not for this case. Like everything needs to be unique. They need to have the believable detail that they want, and they need to illustrate that as much as possible for every single part of those pieces. And one of those things that they really cared so much about is how the concrete cracks and how the concrete kind of deteriorates, and where the rust that might build up within the concrete. All those kind of things need to take in consideration to create these assets. And I would say that there has been so much back and forth to try to get what they really wanted. And it's hard because of the fact that with this studio, it's a Japanese studio, the other challenge is translations. And that's something that, we try hard on our side to make sure that everything's clear. But there's times when we don't get the full context. And it's funny because when we were working on these type of concrete assets for the game, they kept giving us feedback. Well, this doesn't look believable. It doesn't look the way it should. And sometimes even for the quality too, it's like it's not crisp enough. It's not it's not as fully sharp as they would want it. So the one feedback they gave us fully detailed, it's almost like an encyclopedia page from somewhere where they're telling us like the history of how concrete would deteriorate within time, or how it's being, broken up into, and how the rust would build up inside if it stayed in there and not being maintained. All those things we had to, I mean, some of us really already understand what that means, but they had to really spell it out, which is funny. But yeah, we did our best to go as close as to what they were asking for. And I think at some point we got to that end point, but the toll it took to get there was I wouldn't say ridiculous, but it didn't have to take that long. Like it would have had it been spelled out in the very beginning. And this is one of the things that I would bring up in workflows when we consult with studios, is just, you have to get all that context up front. You cannot just assume that the other group is going to create what you're looking like. And obviously they can't mind read. So, you really have to spell it out. And I think this kind of goes along with working with AI, I gotta say. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to the realm of having people guess what you're thinking, and that's the wrong approach. Um, and I would say the assets that went into the game really look nice. I would say, and this was in Death Stranding, so we were making
I
all
was gonna
these
guess,
ruined
yeah.
assets, yeah, and we wanted to make sure that this is what they really want. This is what the detail that's going to convey in the game. And I gotta understand. I mean, I gotta understand that. Yeah, this is Kojima is really big on detail, and I would say that he brought that mentality to the rest of the team to really focus on that. And they just want to make Kojima happy when they make the environments and make it look as good as he would want it, which is
And
interesting in other ways too, and it's cultural ways, right? So
I mean, it's the pursuit for perfection, right? Like, or this idea of
yeah,
getting as close to real life as possible. I mean, I think that's why his vision is so infectious in general. I think he sees games way more as just kind of just games, like they're real worlds or representations of what as close as possible to what life could be, and like really putting you in that setting. But that is a noble but very tough pursuit to follow, and then
yeah,
you need people to know exactly what he wants to be able to deliver on that.
yeah. But yeah, that was
So
one of the interesting experiences I had, and I don't know if that's gonna it's gonna continue to happen that way for them, but but I know that other studios are really I know that they have the right mindset, and they understand what it's gonna involve, because a lot of times some teams aren't very aware of what's gonna happen, what it means to just budget time, and making sure that it falls within that budget of, financially too. People are just, stuck in their department and say, we need to make this look perfect no matter what, and not realizing what that cost is going to be.
yeah, because then it sends you out of whack. Like if you're
Yeah.
focusing so much on all this, then you're not catching up on that. And there are timelines of games. Like it is like talk about like what it means to actually have to deliver like a AAA title, like on time with all the assets mapped out, massive teams. Like you did mention the pipeline and kind of miscommunications, of course, when you're working between different languages or different cultures. But in
Yes.
general, it's a huge task to just get over the finish line.
Yeah. And I would say too, just to add to that, and I would, as a statement here, I would say that even outsourcing, if you are pressed for time and you need outsourcing to help out with that, I gotta say, it's still not the solution. I would say, I mean, yes, you're going to get more bodies thrown into the project, but if your pipeline is not fully streamlined enough to really convey that direction, you're still going to stay, you're going to fall in that same hole. Like, it's going to be a waste of cost if you're not making sure that everyone in the team is focused on what you're looking for. So, it's that kind of focus and making sure that that workflow works, or at least for the pipeline works for external versus internal. That really needs to be in sync.
Yeah. Well, what does it mean when you're working in such a large team to hold a vision? Like you mentioned, there's like an art Bible or like a style Bible. But how, especially when you start outsourcing or the team is so big, how do you make sure that everyone is doing a Naughty Dog style art or maybe Last of Us style art, right? Like, 'cause there is it's almost just to add context to like how I'm thinking it. Like a lot of how we see game development is kind of taken from the movies, like the way we see like the executive producer, and
Yes.
then you got like the vision holder, and then everyone's just trying to create like this movie that can be seen from all angles. Um, do you have how? What's your experience in terms of kind of following a vision, or even setting a vision, or communicating a vision to the rest of the team, and kind of making sure that everyone can deliver on like a similar vibe or style that adheres to what the game's trying to be.
It all, yeah, it all boils down to that style guide and whatever art Bible that's created, because that's the key to everything when it comes to creating the visuals for this game. Like, any context to what that game's gonna look like needs to be visual. I mean, it needs to be available to everyone, because you can't just, well, I mean, in some ways too, working with external developers too, you want them included in part of the process, right? I think the new word for this is called co-dev or co-development. And what it means is that, you're going to get these external teams to really sink in with the actual, core team, to understand how this game's being created, for that, for the context of it, having to just create a list and then maybe a small style guide for the external partners to do is not very complete, and then you're going to run into problems where they're not understanding what is it that you're going to want. Like you really have to involve them even more so as part of that development, is to know more so like what the game's about, but also even with like concepts, concept art, any mood drawings or mood paintings or things like that, to really get the teams to really immersed into what that game is going to look like is very beneficial than just making a small brief and then telling this is what it should look like, right? Um, and this is really, and it's kind of some lessons learned from other projects I've been involved with. Obviously, with working with Japanese studios too, you really have to get all that information up front. Otherwise, you're gonna be running into some areas of questions that you need to send out there. What is it that we need to do here and things like that. And we want to, reduce that amount of back and forth as much as possible. So being in a co-dev environment where actual artists are involved with the team and being able to mesh with them and understand, going over it, all the stuff that's being done, it's much more beneficial than throwing it over the fence, waiting for them to do the work and then wait for the next delivery and then see if it works, because then you're not going to have the full like understanding of what the process they're doing for the external side versus what's happening in internal, and there could be like back and forth happening um, in between. That could be beneficial, especially for like if there's new updates or if there's any changes to the workflow that needs to be happening like constantly. You can't just wait like every other week for like a sync with the team and stuff like that. It has to be more so that teams are very embedded to be involved with that at that process. And I think that is very beneficial because um, everyone's already on board on the same thing. Everyone's synced up. There still are some models that follow the waterfall effect where, you're throwing it over the fence and you're waiting for them to create things and then deliver at a certain date. And that's really more so for the smaller scope when it comes to like what's needed to be done for like a certain part of the game. But when it comes to high volume work, I think co-dev model is much more advisable to use rather than just doing like a smaller like request.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. How do you kind of see the role of an artist having evolved like throughout your career, but in general, when like you first came into the industry and now, like how has that changed?
I think one of the things that is more so important now, and I've been involved with teaching for about five plus years, and we were more so just teaching the technical side of things. And I did, I always advise students it's like, now you know the tools, but you need to know how to create what that direction or what is it that you need to create for that game. What's the visual going to look like for that. That's something that's going to be on you and how you want to determine how that's going to look for your game. And if you're working on a team, you really have to know what that process is, uh, whether it be similar to what it is now, but you need to learn um, any unique processes they have, because odds are you might be working with a studio that has their own game engine. It may not be Unreal, it may not be Unity. So I think for people going in the industry, you really have to be open to a lot of new processes that you're going to face. Yeah, sure, the people are going to look for the skills that you may have when it comes to working with an Unreal or Unity or other game engines that's available to you. But just understand that you should be able to adjust to what the new tech's going to be for that studio. And I gotta say, some of the new, some of their proprietary engines aren't too bad to understand. I mean, some of it may be inspired by Unreal this interface to some degree. So it's not difficult, but you just have to be very open to adjusting to that once you get into that. Um, but as an artist now, it really is being more technical, I would say. The tools, all software. I mean, like software you're using, like, Substance Painter, Substance Designer. 3D Maya is one thing, and then also Blender is starting to really come into the picture here too. Um, those are still important tools, and those they do require some technical knowledge and some sort of technical skill, because you're going to be working with these types of software that has a lot of different uniqueness to it for their tools and how they work. Um, and then on the other side is being able to harness the talent of what your visual eye can create with those tools. So I think that's one of the things that a lot of people have a hard time understanding of what artists are, is that they know what that visual is going to look like and using a tool that would create that visual. It can't just be the tool itself to create what it is. It's really part of the human part that's actually doing the art to make it what it should look like. And again, in on top of that, the artist should be able to interpret what the direction's going to be for that art or whatever game style that's going to be. So
So
yeah.
let's say I'm a dummy. Explain to me like why an artist should be more like obviously like Blender and what was the other one? Maya. I actually did like a Maya course when I was in middle school and I was awful. But this was a long time. This is a
Yeah,
long
yeah.
time ago. But imagine I'm a dummy and I've never really thought of art and how it connects with game engines. I thought when you tell me game engines, I think, oh, that's how you program the physics of the game and the environment. But what does it mean for an artist to have to use an engine? How does that connect? Because I assume some people in the audience here listening are probably like, I thought you have to draw stuff on kind of Photoshop and like maybe like do a couple models, and then why do I have to think about like Frostbite and EA and then like the Red Dead engine at Rockstar, whatever it is, right? Like
Yeah.
why the engine?
I think one of the things that you should understand is that you're creating something for the game engine, right? Understanding how the game engine works is just one thing that you need to have in the back of your head. Like, if you're going to create a 3D model, whether it be Maya or Blender, you just have to understand the process how that is created, and there is a learning curve for that, obviously, because the steps in there involve a lot of hand tinkering with not just the color, but also with textures, and all those things need to be, taken into account. So you need to take, like, if you're starting as a beginner, you do have to take some classes and understanding how those software works. Otherwise, you won't know where to start at that point. The other thing too is just knowing what that workflow is for creating assets for games too, because there are different approaches to using the software. I mean, you can use the software to create highly detailed models that could be used for film production. But there are some aspects of it when you actually make it for games. There's constraints you have to follow, like you need to maintain the poly count, because you don't want to create high poly models in a game that's going to take up so much resources in the game engine. So having to understand what those constraints are going to be as you're creating these models is very important as well. And it's always in the back of your head as you're creating these assets too. So there are some things that you're going to have to learn. You have to take classes on, or at least. And by the way, I don't have these resources back then when I was trying to get in the industry. But I mean, you have all these YouTube videos that really go over the stuff already. And it's like, you don't even have to go to. I would say you don't even have to really go to school or pay a lot of money to really learn some of this stuff. A lot of stuff with the guidance I see out there is actually pretty good as far as I can see. It's just a matter of now wading through all that, because there's so much out there. Um, but once you find the right information and the right workflow of how you want to understand it, I think at some point you're going to get to the point where, hey, I can create this asset in 3D. It's just a matter of just putting it in a game now. Um, and how to put it in the game may not be your part of the job. Sometimes the tech artist would be doing that. Sometimes there's some automation involved to do it, and maybe it could be just a simple few steps to really export it into the game. So things gone a long way since then about doing that approach of putting it into a game engine. But the game engine itself is really just what it is, right? The game engine is the foundation, the framework of what you use to create an actual game under it. So engineers, programmers, they can go in there and set it up to play as it should, based on the game design that's been decided upon for that project. And then from that point, this is where the arts side of things, they are there to just determine like in the beginning, like in pre-production, and whichever it happens first, they'll create the basic foundation of the game, but it's gonna look ugly. It's gonna have a lot of placeholders. Like it could be just a bunch of blocks, right? Or it could be some generic character walking around. That's gonna be exported out at some point that the actual artist team is gonna go in and replace those with. So so as the art team is focusing on creating those assets to make sure it works in the game itself in parallel is actually being fleshed out as well. So then as they're going through in different steps within whatever phases or sprints, as you would call it, um, they would see some things being put in the game. You know, you'll see the progression happening every single build the game that they create, and see it just start to assemble right before your eyes. So it's really cool to see that process happening. But it's as an artist, that's really what your part of the job is just creating those assets and putting into the game. You don't have to worry about how animation will be because then there's another animation team involved with that, right? So there could be that too. And I understand there could be particular like roles that might have a combination of that, which is, I would say, more so like in the indie side of things, or maybe in double A budgets, but more so that if you're a part of an art team, that's really what you're only doing is just creating what the art asset's going to be for that game. I don't know if that
Can I
answers
ask?
that question.
No, that totally
Mhm.
does. I'm trying to think like so we're talking about like skills that are important today for being an artist, and we mentioned of course being technical, and I think that goes without saying. Nowadays, you have so many engines to contend with. I think way more than back in the day. You have lots of free resources, so there's no excuse to not being technical. I think you can learn. You don't have to technically go to school. I think
I,
that's really sounded. Sorry, go ahead,
yeah,
please.
I would say also, and you mentioned about 2D drawing too. And I think one of the things that's still part of the foundational part of being an artist is to really know how to draw. like, if you have the ability to take what you see through your eyes and put it on paper and make it look as it would that you would want it to look like on paper and it makes sense. I think that's one of the skills that that would be great to have as you're actually going into 3D. Uh, there are some cases where you maybe not really good. You don't have to be exactly good at 2D to really get into 3D. I've seen a lot of students that really do really well doing 3D, but not really do well in 2D. But it's because of the fact that you have that mindset of working in 3D that you can actually create something. And what's funny is that once you know how the tools work, it kind of clicks. Like like this is what's going to look like. I could do this in 3D and make it such and such and such, to really make it what it looks like. So once you get past the um the obstacle of actually learning the tool, it gets to a point where what, I can make this straight out without looking at tutorials and things like that and make it look as it should. But again, that would take some practice, and you need to put some dedication, understanding how that works and what the workflow is going to be.
So we talked about technical. You talked about being able to draw. I mean, of course, that seems like a requisite, but it shouldn't be lightly said.
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask, like, what about the element of communication and teamwork when you're working in art, right? Because you're working these giant teams, you need to fit within a style. You're working with animators, you're working with riggers, you're working with people that are engineers, of course, people that are just building the game on top of like the assets that you're drawing or the models that you're creating. What's that like? How do you need? I imagine you would, but I'm asking an obvious question. Like, what's the element of teamwork like in there?
So one of the things that you really will have to really know is just how that process is involved in that team. And it is up to the leads or whoever's in charge of the team to provide that kind of resources to the artist. Like if you're going to onboard a new artist, you need to tell them how things are done in that project. And you should have all this documentation. And by the way, documentation is super important, especially for any size team. I would say you should document your stuff. Uh, Document the process, document your workflow, make sure that is available, because if you onboard new people into your team, you need to have these kind of resources for them to look into as they're getting, immersed into what that's going to be for that team. Um, you can't have them figure it out themselves. That's the worst thing you could do, right? Um, as an artist, you really want to expect that. You're going to have to ask a lot of questions. You're going to make sure that this is what they want and this is what how it's going to be done. And you really have to be adamant about that, because if you're just there, if they're telling you that you should already know this, well, they should tell you what, you know, because they don't know what you don't know, right? So you really have to tell them, well, I don't know exactly what this means when it has to do. So you have to be more communicative about it, but don't assume that this is what it's done, because maybe it's going to end up being wrong. So it's all just a matter of making sure that you get the resources you need as a new artist to really know that this is what they want and that this is how you do it for the game. And the processes can be very, very particular too, by the way. So you have to be really careful and really mindful about knowing some of those. And a lot of things too really involves just learning from a new engine too. Like you don't know, I mean, you've never touched the engine, so you really have to get in there and just start reading up on any documentation they have, and then ask questions, because there could be something missing that you feel would be useful that they should put in documentation. So it's that back and forth is important, because you could be the person to help them improve the documentation, if anything. So yeah, yes, communication is very important. You can't just be there and work under the radar, unless you really know what you're doing and they already trust you on that. Sure, but if you're a new person, you don't know, start asking those questions, so then and they'll understand. They'll trust you as you do your work when you're doing that, because they know that they understand that you don't know, and they can tell you what it is. And if it's not in, and once they say that and they realize it's not in documentation, then we need to update documentation. So it's helpful for them too, is what I would say.
Let me flip it now. We've talked about, I feel like, an artist getting into like a AAA studio. I wanna put you a sec to the test. If you had to start building your own indie project, or with a group of friends start making a game, how would you approach the art side of things if you had to start tomorrow? Like, what would be some advice there?
Oh God, I literally have that documentation already set to go. Like I already have, like, some of the standard operating procedures for art doesn't really change as much between projects. Like maybe there could be a few tweaks in there, but I already have a standard operating procedure document that I could use to really just cater to whatever project I need to. So yes, I will have all that all ready to go, so people will understand how that works. There are also going to be needs as far as like what that visual is going to be. Whoever's going to be the art director needs to have all the materials for the visual side of things, in addition to the documentation for the technical side of things too. So, we'll have this infrastructure and framework of the documentation. We'll have like a Confluence. Confluence is like a little, it's like a resource you can set up. This is a sort of a software solution. I would say software networking solution where you can actually make a page of all the information and documentation you have in one central source, so then you can access that. A lot of studios are using Confluence or other forms of resources to really store all that information. But if it's just an indie studio, it'd probably be just Google Drive, if anything, or some other smaller page that we do, like a Google's page or something like that. But I would definitely have a lot of information involved, or at least available to everyone to really understand what game's about. And I'm literally doing that for my prototype right now, because I'm working as a solo dev, working on a game as well. So that's part of my stick up spot, making sure that everything's in line and everything's set in place. So then if anyone were to jump into my project, they're going to see it. They're going to see what it needed. And again, I'm still open to questions. I'm not just going to, sit there as like, have at it, look at the documentation and learn from it. There's always, the person side of the human side of things, where I need to go in there and run through it, but then point towards the documentation, because it's all in there. So
I just think it's
yeah.
wild how technical you need to be. Like, you think artists, oh, they're going to be drawing, but it's like a game artist is such a different creature compared to maybe an artist for like a different industry, because they're getting in so technically. They're breaking down all those pipelines, the working flows between the different teams. You have to know what you're talking about with
Mhm.
with a certain engine, how a texture is going to react, how a model works, what the handoff's like. And if you don't know that, you need to be able to talk to people, understand that, and then learn it and apply it, which I think from the outside, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, I'm a bit of a dummy. I didn't know that like artists like I've seen it, but I didn't think that artists had to be at such a kind of very highly technical level. You'd think it's just drawing, right? Like I'm just
Yeah.
ignorantly.
Yeah, it's once you get in there, and that's the thing too, is that know that there are gonna be constraints as you're doing artwork. Like you can learn, ins and outs of working with Blender and Substance Painter and make really cool stuff. But once you start seeing what those constraints are gonna be, you're gonna have to adjust to that, right? You're gonna have to make sure that you kind of balance to what that is required. And most of the time, and especially with documentation too, like they'll probably tell you like this is what you should do, right? There'll be times where you know you probably would have to kind of wing it to some degree to really get to what it is, but and then figure out if it works or not. So there's some openness to it. I mean, but yeah, like you said, it is something that you need to be prepared for once you get into the industry. Is that the technical side of things is going to be there, and you can't get away from it. I know that there might be some tools that might make things a bit easier, but having to understand why those tools work is still important. And again, that's back to technical. So.
What's the dark side of being an artist in the games industry or within a games team? Like, and I mean dark side in the sense that, like, where's the frustration, the difficulty, the bottlenecks? Like, what are some of the the things that people don't kind of talk about or glamorize?
So I do see, and I see this a lot with some of the people I've talked with, and some of the people I've worked with too in the industry, is that a lot of studios don't really have that sort of culture of uh leading teams, or at least to some degree, understanding how to lead a team to some degree. I know there are a few, like there are some artists that we actually get that role, right? Like you have a senior artist that's been doing really well in the industry. All of a sudden he's a lead, and maybe he's never led a team before, right? So there might be some instances where some people will not have the experience of how to run a team, or at least for that matter, being part of a productions process of working with various teams. So you may run into some aspects of the culture where they don't have that particular structure in place. So like I said before, I think as a new artist and stuff, you really have to be more adamant about what is it that they want, and making sure that the communication is clear as well. Otherwise, if the structure isn't as what it should be, I would probably just find another place, another project to get into, because it could lead to it could actually lead to burnout. It could lead to low morale, I would say. And I've seen this happen where, people worked um, like for volume work, by the way, too. People work, and this is, by the way, this is at the time where crunch is almost normalized to some degree, which really sucks back then.
Yeah.
Um, it really affected, the mental state, and, it just runs into burnout. And I know some people would want to work hard to really look good for the team, but if it comes to the point where you're sacrificing your mental, health, sacrificing your time, there's something wrong here. There's something about production that they're not focusing on. And most of the time you should be vocal about it. You shouldn't keep it to yourself and hope it goes away. If you make yourself look really good, like a workhorse of some sort, they're just gonna milk it out of you, until you say something. You have to really be clear. You really have to be vocal about it, because you don't want to sacrifice your well being to be in that studio. And you'd be surprised. Like some studios are very, very, open to that. Um, but if there's a studio that has red flags and they don't care, I would I would pretty much run at that point. Like, don't be part of that. Um, so be mindful of that too as you're going in this industry. Making sure that the teams that you're being involved. I got to say, some indie teams too, you got to be careful about too, because a lot of times you'll have people who started a team and not having experience, creating games, and they don't realize what they're doing. So if you run through those kind of red flags, then you really have to be mindful about whether or not you need to bring it up with them, raise it as an issue, or just not, just quit. Don't work somewhere else that has a better culture or work culture. But yeah,
Funny.
that's sort of the ugly side of things where, like, if there's a point where I don't know if other studios are still doing this because crunch is still a bad thing, obviously, and it is a result of really you know missteps in production and management because of the fact that the planning is done way. And if it's normalized to some way where they're using crunch as sort of part of that production, then there's something wrong there. So,
Yeah, it's funny because just because you're good at your job and you're moving up the ranks of a company doesn't mean you can be a good manager or a people manager, right? Like sometimes you're a great
mhm,
individual contributor, you're a great artist, you understand how the teams work, but you don't know how to manage people. And that's okay. Like it's not I think I think people can learn, but I don't think it's for everyone. And kind of finding yourself in the wrong team where it's being mismanaged, where the work is being misprioritized, or maybe there's just way too much going on. I mean, you balance that with the fact that people are working in a position, especially when you're in games where you're super passionate and you really want the game to do well and you really want to like hone your craft and show everyone else that you can kind of run with the big dogs, as they would say. And
yeah.
you get this combination or people just start burning out, and uh it's tough, man. I guess my follow-up question would be, do you think it's only gotten worse? Like, where are we today, like, as, like, a pulse check on the industry? Have things been able to get a bit better, or is it just, and maybe
It
obviously goes studio to studio. You can't just, like, say the whole
yeah.
games industry, but it is, like, a very taxing role, like, drawing up so many assets and just
Yeah,
doing all the artist work.
there's been a change, and I think there's a shift going on as far as, like, working with volume working. It really is more so of just, leaning towards external teams to help out with the production. And whether or not they follow the old traditional, well, not I don't say traditional, but the old, like, outdated style of just going through throwing it over fences up. I mean, that's still kind of it still exists, I think. I've seen some projects like that still happening, but, more so that now companies are starting to get much more leaner. Um, I mean, obviously with PlayStation, when I worked there, and obviously they needed to be leaner and they need to cut some departments, obviously our department was cut for that, um, but I see a lot of other studios laying off workers, and just for the fact that it may or may not be the AI, but it could just be a new mindset of running the studio now, where they need to find the resources at a cost that makes sense, but you know, out with external partners to be involved with that, that would that would be probably the next thing that they're going to focus on. But in the external side of things, code development is that new buzzword that was happening just years ago that just started to get introduced. So that kind of new sort of approach could be much more um, inviting for a lot of studios now to really go into that. But again, it really means that more thought out structure needs to be created for codev as well, because some people interpret codev in a weird way. Like, it still kind of goes back to the traditional or like the usual outsourcing model that you've been doing in the past. So there's that. But yeah, I think the mindset's starting to change, and they want to make sure that as they're restructuring their studio, they need to figure out what those solutions are going to be, and whether it be external partners or whether it be focusing on people specific to artificial intelligence for LLMs and things like that. That could be something that's going to change, and maybe that type of role is going to be also created or maybe modified for artists as well. Who knows? We haven't seen really good results from using AI to do these kind of things, but external development to partners are still that next option, right? So
So so
yeah,
mistakenly are people saying that artists are being fired from the industry, and they're saying, oh, it's because of AI, but in reality it's because of outsourcing and obviously like having to restructure like finances. Let's say like a company is thinking, okay, it makes sense. Like you can't
yeah,
have so many people. And so look, if we have to make X amount of games, we can actually like estimate and process the budget pretty precisely by getting an outsourced project and saying we need these amount of hours for this type of work. They'll give them an estimate, boom, boom, right? Instead of
yes,
having your own fleet of artists that you have to move around. And it sucks because it's sad
Yeah.
because a lot of people lose full-time positions, and outsourcing doesn't really mean you're gonna have a high quality game or high quality art, but it is just it's just the way things go when you're operating at that kind of level. I mean, is it
Yep.
right or not? You can argue about it, but they're in their right to do it. It just it does hurt artists who are working in games, and but I always do try to take a balanced approach because it's not like you have to demonize the company for doing it, but um
Yeah.
I think you can demonize a company if they make a bad game after doing that. I mean, that at that point, that's on them, right? But like,
Yeah.
it's tricky. How do you feel about? I guess I guess I kind of gave my position, but like overall with outsourcing, like what's your kind of position like as an artist?
I think there should be a good balance between that. I wouldn't say outsourcing is like the end all be all solution to getting something done because I mean, more so, you're really just adding more people to your project in
Mm,
more degrees than anything. It's just that you're skipping the cost of having to actually hire someone to be part of your company because now you just have this other development team actually doing that for you, and you are free from being happy to lay people off because you could just decide not to work with the external team anymore, right? And that would be it. You can just cut it. So I mean, there's that sort of approach that you would think about because if we're going to start we're going with leaner teams, I think more so that if it's a leaner team, you're looking at the core developers that's actually creating the game. You're not looking at like additional hands and help that actually puts into it because the external developer team is going to be doing that for you. The core development team is the one that's going to be leading the external team to really get what they need. And that then I think that's what's going to end up happening instead of just an actual studio hiring everyone up, together and making a game and then laying people off at the end. So there's that ideal model that's alternative than just hiring more people and then laying people off. And it's been happening for quite some time already as it is. I mean, we've been using external developers for a lot of years at this point. Um, there is a conference that actually focuses on having a summit with all the external developers. It's called God, it left my head for a minute. It's XDS. I don't know if you heard of it, External Developer
I
Summit.
haven't. No.
And they have a lot of people, everyone that's involved with that will meet up and talk about, what is it that we can do to help out with all the developers out there in the world. And, before it was really back to the old ways of production, but now even with the buzzword codep, that's a new thing that's happening now that makes it's a little bit more, it makes more sense and a little bit more appealing to how code development works. Um, but that's something that could be the right approach when it comes to it. The way I feel about it too is that if it worked with costs and things like that, if I establish a team now as just a core team, a very small, like maybe 5-person team, and we have a means to work with this development studio, that's totally fine. I think that will help me in the long run, just understanding the amount of scope that I have for this project and having a strong team to be involved with just creating some of the extra stuff that really doesn't need to be spent on. So then the core team can actually focus on the important stuff. Um, but in the same time, I want to make sure that when we have an external team coming in, that they are still part of our team. They're not like a separate team that we just not talk to, right? They're literally going to be in our meetings. They're going to be on our syncs. We're going to talk about back and forth. All those things are still going to be in, and that's the new kind of model with code development that I'm thinking of when it comes to that. And I've already experienced a few studios. Actually, one studio that did it is starting to focus on that, which is great. And I think it was going in the right direction. It's just a matter of budget now at this point of what they're going to do. Um, but I think that would be the right mindset to really approach that is if you're starting a new company and a new dev team, is to really think about whether or not the external team would be beneficial for you. If you're a team of 5 and the scope of what that game is going to be involved is not going to be a lot of volume assets, then I think that's fine. You should be able to do it yourselves. But if it comes to the point, and this could be different situations, like if you're working with a publisher, if a publisher picked you up and then they send you a deadline, like, hey, you need to have this game done, soon. And then that's where planning is going to have to be made, and you have to ramp up, and obviously you would probably hire more people, or you could probably go for the external team to really jump in and work on your project. So there's a lot of things that you're going to have to decide on how that's going to be approachable. But you should be able to. I would say initially, if you start your company, I wouldn't ramp up hundreds of people to create a game at first. It's like you really have to start small, and you got to really make sure that what that scope of your game is going to be is going to make more sense. If it means to hire people locally, it could be just a few people, fine. But if it's going to be like 50 more people or more, I I would say let's try for an external team to help out with that instead.
Yeah, it's funny how the best game studios always start with very small, like knitted teams, and then they
Yeah.
expand. Like the successful ones, that's all. They always lay those foundations. They develop their style, their way of working. They, like you say, they do a bunch of documentation, and then new people start coming in, and everyone starts connecting with it. And then if you need to do something um, accelerated, or you have to meet a deadline, or you just don't have the capacity for do another feature, something that's been requested, you can look at outsourcing. But you need that tight knit team at the core of it
Yes.
all that knows how to work together.
Mhm.
No, I completely agree. Um, let's move to a topic that I've been wanting to talk to you.
Yes.
I think since we met at GDC, but it is AI, the demon in the room.
Yes.
Is it the true demon that people set it out to be when it comes to art? Like, what's your take on AI?
So AI has been around for quite a while. It's just that at some point it's just gotten more so in the forefront now because of what people are saying about it and what the results are. It's funny because, it's like back in the day when internet first came into like I was like I went to college before internet, which is now I feel so old. But when people started learning internet, I mean, they're going crazy over the internet, right? It's like they're doing some crazy stuff with like looking up stuff and all that. It was a big deal. Um, and it's sort of like that same reaction with AI. Like you see a lot of guys just creating stuff that looks really cool, and they're posting it up, and to other people's eyes, it looks terrible, right? It's funny to see that kind of um that's sort of a loop happening again where you have this new tool or new technology that creates something that looks cool, but it's not that great to some people's eyes too. I would say too with and what Blender is a 3D program that's been out for a while. It's actually pretty old, and when it first came out, uh nobody cared about it. Nobody, like, all the 3D artists, people who in games, like, they looked as, oh, this is not like Maya, it doesn't look great. The stuff that they made in Blender looked really mediocre. And nobody would want to, take on it. And artists didn't want to use it because it didn't look right. But then years later, when people starting to adapt to it, and Blender was starting to get a little bit more improved, now, people now they're considering using Blender part of the process now, which is really cool. Which it's an interesting uh a journey that they had as far as what it is from very beginnings towards now. So I would say for AI, that's sort of like in that stage where people are just reveling over how what it can do, but also scared at what it can actually do in the long run. Which I guess that could be some concerns that people will have because when it comes to AI, it could be like a front of cutting people or taking people's jobs. I mean, there could be some weight to that, but I would say it's not like going to be like apocalypse, right? Where it's going to be like everyone's losing their jobs and things like that. It does look like it that way. I think it's just for the fact that AI is part of the reasons, but it could be other things as well. But for now, for AI, for me, for that matter, I think it's just a new kind of emerging technology that we need to understand and see if it really works to the way it should do in the process of like for game development. Um, and I see some really good pluses for that. Some things that could be approached in that way, but I do not see it as a way of taking the talent shortcut of it. And what I mean by that is like if you don't know how to do art and you're using AI to create the art for you, then that shouldn't be the approach because it looks, in your eyes and maybe to some people's eyes, it will look good enough, right? But I would say no, because then the other part, other people, the other percentage of people who are experts in this, or at least know what quality should be on that art, will see it as AI slop. And that's the whole reality, the harsh reality of it. Um, like the example with the Coke commercial, right? Like they didn't care the inconsistencies of that Christmas Coke commercial with that truck that it's constantly changing every scene. It's funny. They just care about whether or not people react to it or view it, right? And I mean, that's another story in itself. But having to have that mindset of not care about the quality is still uh, a bad approach, I would say, because then you're just creating a reputation of yourself, or at least for the company to really, you're just cutting corners to just get that out there and not really care about what people think when it comes to actual quality. And I think this kind of boils down to whether or not you want to have that uh, uh, reputation for quality or not. That's where, that's where it kind of reflects on what you try to do. Uh, for me, AI is going to be something that I want to look into. Like I'm very critical about this. When I look into AI, a lot of people are saying this could do this and this and this. Well, let me try that. Let me see if it really does it, right? Let me see if it really benefits to what I can do. And by the way, I know how things are created, so I am not using it to forego what I don't know. And sometimes I tell it to tell me and at least document to me, what is it that you're doing here? Why is it you doing this? Right? A lot of times you're going to have to be, for me, that is, and everyone else should be doing this too. It's like, if you don't know how it's being created, you should at least ask why it's deciding on what it is, right? Um, if you're not, if you don't know how it's done, then you're making the AI do it. You should at least know why and how. Uh, for a person who is a pro at it, they should already know. And I think when it comes to prompting and stuff like that, and also there's a new thing happening now, and maybe it's the new approach when it comes to AI as well. And this is something that a lot of people are actually just mentioning, in their own, you know, social media, is that you need to put guardrails as you're working with AI. Um, and that's just defining what AI does for you, like whether or not it actually creates something for you, but then you put in constraints of what you want it to do. And of course, you need to be a pro at it. You need to understand what those constraints are going to be. Otherwise, if you don't, the AI just can go crazy and just figure out, based on patterns, what it should look like. And that's really not the approach you're going to do, because if you guys don't know, when you were using AI, there is a cost. I know it's free, but then even with the services out there, you can only go so far free, right? And the whole thing with tokens and things like that. Um, it will come to a point where you run out of tokens, and you either going to decide to wait like a month or so for a refresh, or you have to pay for a monthly. So you're now at this point paying for AI to create something. And for those of you who don't know, if you're working on something with a prompt and you're not getting the right results, you just spent tokens or money to really create that, right? So now you got to make another iteration. You got to pay for that too in order to get that. And if you don't put any guardrails to really reduce that back and forth, then it's going to be more costly than you just drawing it out yourself, or creating it by hand. So there's that kind of balance you need to understand and what you need to do as you approach that. And for me, if I find it beneficial for me, that if it helps me skips a few steps to create what I need, and it is what it is properly, it does it properly that I want, then that's a huge win. But if it's gonna take me like multiple times for me to ask for it to create something, then we're back to square one. Like I'm not gonna be spending huge amounts of money to create something that's not. It's gonna be just good enough, but not perfect, in my eyes. So there's that balance again of understanding. Going, what is it if you're going to use AI to really create the outcome of what you want, versus letting AI decide for you? That's the worst that you could do, I think.
Yeah, and if I can add on that balance, I would say people who are using AI to approximate the work of an artist will struggle, and the artists who understand the craft and use AI to empower the processes that they need to deliver on will go
Yes.
flying. right?
Yes.
That's the thing that I think people miss. It's like if you're an artist and you're freaked out about AI right now, my advice would be, and again, my advice is whatever. Like I'm also learning this stuff.
Yeah.
But in general, like as I use these tools and I learn more about AI, it's really about, do you understand the work that you're asking the AI to do? Like if that prompt doesn't work, can you break it apart? Be like, all right, I can roll my sleeves. I can get in there. I can maybe draw this myself for a sec. Can you break down the overall task into chunks of smaller work where you can execute at a more precise level of detail? I think that's the
Yeah.
stuff where that excites me. That makes me think, great, maybe AAA studios don't need 300 artists, or like an army of artists working together. Maybe like one person who really knows what he or she is doing with AI can do the work of another 10 people, which means that, yeah, maybe there'll be less positions at AAA, but I think people can go out of AAA and make their own studios, and especially artists go out and create their own kind of high level quality at the production rate that usually you'd only be capable of doing at AAA, but now you can do it in a smaller context. And I think that's exciting for artists and games. I tend to be more of an optimist on this stuff. I could be completely
Yes.
wrong, but yeah,
Yeah, and I think the other issue is just having to be an artist. In its core, I think, is another thing.
yeah,
Like that's a lot of artists are really adamant that AI is not going to be the artist, and they don't want people thinking that it is going to be the artist instead of hiring an actual human to do art. That's like that's more dystopian than anything, but 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 in reality, it really is. You still need a talented artist to really drive it.
of
Like you,
course.
the talent has to drive it. You can't just like I gotta admit, I'm not good at music. I'm not going to use AI to create the music for my game. I need to hire someone to actually create it because there's no way I want to have AI kind of determine that. I know it creates really cool stuff with music, but I do know, and as an artist, I do know that if a musician hears it, he's probably gonna break it down even more. It's like I am not gonna go through that. Like if I don't know how to make music, I'm gonna hire someone to do it, and I'm not gonna use AI to do that. If it's gonna be a placeholder, a lot of people kind of frown against it, but it's just a placeholder, right? Like I could probably do that, but in the long run, it's gonna have to end up being someone who creates the music, or even for the sound that matter too. So um, that's what I'm really firm against as well. Is just having to create something that artistically someone can do shouldn't be the shortcut using AI. Unless you really know how it's done and you know how it's created and people accept it as what it is for the quality it is, then that would make more sense. But I think more so is just making sure that um the direction I want, it actually makes sense and it works, and making sure that the professionals hear it and understand, if they see it and okay, well this looks good too. Or it sounds good. And and then I could get the good sign off and say, yeah, I could use it that way. But in the long run, it's gotta be human involved with that.
I think it can be human involved, but the more kind of different crafts at, I look at the way they use AI and I look at the way we did it before AI. And like, let's say I had to write, I'll give you an example. I'll give you my example. I had to write essays in high school.
Yeah.
And so what I'd do is I'd go on Google and I'd find a bunch of articles and sources and I'd copy paste those into my document and then I'd rewrite it. So I'd take it and then I'd go through the pain of just rewriting it and like putting in my own language so it wouldn't pop up on the whatever the copy paste
Yeah.
I can't remember it was called. Turnitin. That's what it was called. It was called Turnitin. It
Yeah.
would check if there was plagiarism, right? Fair enough. I think that ship has sailed now with AI because that rewriting now happens like that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I imagine like an engineer who like engineering when you're learning to program, like you'll go on GitHub and you'll just like pick code and you'll be like, all right, that's interesting. I'm not going to write all the code by scratch. I'm going to take what other people have done and I'll kind of make the foundation and I'll tweak it for what I need precisely. And then when I think of art, let's say I'm trying to figure out what the mood for my game is that's coming up, or I'm just trying to brainstorm some ideas. Typically, before AI, I'd do a Google image search and I'd go look at what other people have done, and I'd probably make
Yeah.
a mood board of all these ideas, and then I'd take things that I liked and I'd pop it in. And so I question, like, if people already use AI in those crafts, what is the difference if I ask AI to draw me something based on these inspirations that I've identified, give me an example that I can then digest or maybe work with directly? Would that still be considered art? That's my I don't know what the answer is. I'm just trying to understand like what does it mean to work with AI, right?
That's that's a little bit sort of a gray area at this point. Like
Mm,
I think that's the right approach, I would say, as far as like having to work with AI to get what your results are. You're actually building up a direction, a visual like reference to what it needs to follow, rather than having it guess for you, right? You're actually controlling it. You're in there telling it, hey, well, I need to have you take some of this from here, take some of this from there. The only issue probably is just style, and this is where it kind of you don't know whether or not you're copying a style or not because of the fact that AI can actually just take any patterns and then utilize a style, and people will probably catch it, and you won't know, right? You don't know like if it's the style that someone's already done, and that's scary because for like the anime styles that you see out there, right? A
sure.
lot of
Yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. For what was it?
It
Uh,
was called the Anime House in Japan.
yeah,
They were plenty pissed, and rightly so, because all of a
yeah.
sudden, like their whole art style was just completely plagiarized. I
Hmm.
don't want to sound like I'm saying that's okay at all.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not trying to say that. I just do think that we are sometimes not cognizant of the fact that a lot of the work we do nowadays is just kind of good artists copy, great artists steal. I think a lot of people do just
yeah.
go out and look for inspirations, and like a Blizzard game, right? Like they kind of tore
Oh,
the
yeah,
way in the 2000s defining what the game should look like, and then obviously companies follow suit and they copy the UI. And like if you look at
yeah.
every kind of launcher for like BattleNet, everything looks the same now. There tends to be a average that everyone's kind of happy and say this is what's acceptable, this is what players like, and then I
Yeah.
and then you can play around with it. So it's definitely a gray area. I love how we're kind of in that space trying to figure it out, but I just don't see enough of those conversations. What I see is like straight demonization of the tool rather than,
Yeah.
hey, why don't we have a chat about how to use it properly, how to use it respectfully, how to use it respecting people's IP? It just ends
That
up being like, right?
yeah, that's a standing issue right now. Is just that's when it comes to copyright and things like that now at this
Yeah.
point because of how AI can scrape the internet and just look at other people's work that's already in display in the internet, or whether it's available in the internet publicly, right? It could do that. And then when it comes to like copying people's work, that is definitely going to be end up being more so of an issue uh uh, later down the line, because with 2D styles and stuff like that, having to claim that is another kind of that is another frontier in itself at this point. I mean, legal is still trying to iron out what is it that's going to mean about claiming your copyrights for certain things when AI starts to use that as a reference now. Um, and I know that there's going to be something established at some point. I just don't know when, and people are still trying to figure that out. But I think
Right.
one of the things that's going to have to end up happening, especially if we're going to utilize AI for generative AI, that is that studios or even company that's going to use generative AI, they need to make it more so of using an LLM that's local to them. They're not going to be using it to scrape the internet to copy someone's work. They need
Yes.
to
They train it
create
on their
their
own
own.
stuff.
Exactly. They need to make their own library of works that they want to use AI to create. And that is your ownership to that, right? You're not going to be scared about any liability of someone's copyrights that you're copying from, because it is from your own library that you're doing this from. I think that's more so what companies should just do, just to be in the safe side. And then from there, that does take some work. Like, you still need to have artists to build that library. So it's not like you're going to use an AI to create a library for you. You have to you still need to get human people to create that. But at that point, you are controlling the AI at this point. We're not using, they're not having AI decide it for you.
And it goes
Yeah.
both ways, right? It goes for a AAA studio and it goes for an indie collaboration of
Hmm.
three people. Like start creating your own style, start kind of training an AI in that style.
Yeah.
Like it's I
It's
wish it was more discussed. Yeah.
yeah, it's hard too when it comes to realistic. Like, you can't really do much with the realistic side of things. But if it's gonna be stylized like Ratchet and Clank, you obviously don't want to copy that and make your other game like that. But you just have to have it your own unique style to make it work. Um, But yeah, I think there's going to be more of that back and forth happening at this point to figure out how that's going to work. But when it comes to AI using other things like so helping us with tedious tasks and things like that would be the bigger benefit at this point. The art side is, again, that it could be a bigger topic as far as when it comes to art, and I definitely would like to hear more perspectives on that too. But for the generative side, I think much more of a controlled environment is the way to go.
Yeah. I mean, also the idea that you don't have to do. I think this stuck out when we first spoke, which it really resonated with me. This idea of like how AI can be applied. The fact that Pareto's principle, 80% of the work you actually do doesn't really matter. Like it's good, but like it's the 20% that really raises the bar, right? Like
Yes.
like you mentioned, like
Yes.
Last of Us, that one piece of art that's sitting there. They're like, yeah, you have
Oh
to
my
draw a
gosh.
can. And it's like, I don't want to spend like 20 minutes of my day to day drawing a can because like I could be doing something that kind of is
Yeah.
more important to me, like drawing the actual character or like thinking of how that brick wall is going to become rusting concrete in 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's I think is the major hack that people aren't considering. It's like it's somewhat of a paradox. The artist craft in the games industry seems to be going under immense pressure, risk of outsourcing, uh burnout, loads of crunch, and yet at the
Mhm.
same time we have this tool which possibly allows you to reduce the scope of all that amount of work you need to
Yes.
do to then focus on the really good stuff and do great,
Yeah.
right? And you mentioned that when we first spoke, and I thought, my God, of course, yes, that's a really great upside that we should probably be talking more of.
Yeah. A lot of things that could be beneficial for sure. I think that's something that we can't overlook. I think for the future of how this is going to be, I would say whether or not you're against or for, I think just you know be more informed of what that means is
Yeah.
what I would say. Because if you're going to die on that hill saying AI is the demon, um, I don't know what's going to happen for you. I mean, if you're going to be the person, like I don't know if you're going to be just going to analog and just drawing. I mean, what can you do? It sounds like a something. It sounds like a movement that you want to do, but you can't because of the fact that we've been doing this with technology for so long, and how I mentioned that you got to be technical to be in this field, right? So it's like, to what end you're going to say that I should be more human involved, right? And that's something that you have to be careful about. Um, there's a lot of things that you want to think about too, as far as how that can be utilized for benefits as well. And I think you just mentioned really good examples of what it could mean for a studio to work. As far as like with costs and tedious stuff and all those things that could be beneficial for us in the long run. So a lot of those things could surface at some point, and people will really be acceptive of it. But we'll see. Again, this is a road that we're going to be going through, and who knows how it's going to end up being later on down the line.
And
My approach right now with AI is just how do I get this prototype working? How is I going to do it? I do have a programming background as well, so I'm like I am looking closely at how well it does this code, and having it tell me like what is it's doing too is so important for me. So having that careful approach for any studio to do that is probably the way to go, I think.
I mean, and I don't mean this out of malice towards AAA studios or maybe larger corporations. But if they're already doing outsourcing, right, because they're trying to cut costs, right? Like there
Hmm.
is that
Yes.
inevitable magnetic pull of cutting costs because you need to restructure because games are getting expensive. Do we really expect that when generative AI, should it get pretty good, they're not going to start employing it and they won't do it behind players' backs? Like I just see like unless every
Yeah.
game that comes out has a certified like, and I know even Steam is working on this, and
Yes.
I'm not here to judge. I could play a AI generate. I could be playing like I think what was it like Expedition 40, the Expedition game that came out, and then like it was about to win an award, and then it came out that
Oh
one of its
yes.
textures were AI, and then everyone freaked out, and I'm like, so big deal, like that texture. At least someone like maybe someone caught a break, and you didn't have to like send someone back on like on a weekend to make it,
Yeah.
and yet
Uh,
everyone goes up in a roar. What's going to happen in a world where everyone starts doing this? And it's like, is it going to be like buying organic from the supermarket? Like, oh, I'm buying tomatoes, but it's like it's the same thing
yeah.
anyway. It's like, do we need that seal of approval? Like, it's just I
Yeah.
just don't see it not happening if in the condition that this technology should be getting better.
I love how you brought that example of organic, right? Like, oh, this game is organic. Like, it's funny because that situation you talk about, Exhibition 33, I think you're talking about.
Yes,
I
thank you. I
think
forgot the number.
the context of that was that they were using generative AI as sort of a placeholder or for design purposes only, and they did not use it. They did not plan on using it for the actual game. But the problem with that is that he just mentioned AI, right?
Exactly.
And
But it's
people don't
like,
know the context of that, what that means, and they're just assuming that, oh, okay, well, they're using AI to create the game, and it's like, then that's the conclusion at that point, and people, that's just the public perception is a bit more black and white to some degree, right? They'll just hear like any mention of AI, and okay, well, this is bad, right? And
I
there
think
is
that that
no,
that
yeah,
that's how it always is with any new technology, though. I think that's just how, like with the phone and with the internet and with even with electricity, and probably when we discovered fire, everyone's freaking out thinking it's coming from a demon or the sun god, right? Like it's always that, and I,
yeah,
I wish there could be a more nuanced conversation to the point that I think I've talked about AI on this channel, and now like I left my last company, and now there are people on Reddit saying that I got fired because I talked about AI or I wanted to do AI stuff in the company. I'm like, that's not true. Like
oh my
I had
gosh,
nothing to do with AI. I didn't even know. Like I've used it to analyze some transcripts, but like it's just there's such a fervent kind of wanting to demonize this thing, and it's like, so
yes,
what if I tried to do something with AI? Like I'm doing it not I'm doing it to create an efficiency that allows other people to do better work. And like, if you don't realize how much people are in crunch in game studios right now, how hard people are working, it would be nice if maybe people on a Friday could get off at 5. Like that.
yeah,
If AI allows that, I think that's a win for everyone. If like
yeah,
people can go back to their families, and if you want to use AI to just blaze through the door and build your own indie game, and that's up to the audience or the people who are buying your game to approve that or not. I don't think that's so bad. But again, I'll get demonized for this, and I don't mind because I'm willing to have a conversation and really get to the bottom of it. Hopefully
yeah.
at some point.
Well, the public perception right now is pretty drastic at this point, when it interprets what AI is. So it has to calm down, later in the future. I don't know when that's going to be. I know that with maybe there was one publisher at GDC, I forgot which one it was, but they said they literally do not want anyone involved with AI with developers. Like,
Yeah.
not because of what AI is, but because of public perception for marketing. So, it's really bad already as it is. Like, you don't want like, you could make a really awesome game in AI, but if you mention it's made in AI, it could mean a death knell of marketing at that point. So,
And and
you know?
and you may be using AI not like you're just generating all the assets. I think people just assume, oh, I'm gonna press a button and send a prompt and it's gonna build like a whole model. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I used AI to like fix an eye to make sure that it looks a bit more realistic in the style I wanted because I didn't want to go back into Blender and do it myself manually through a bunch of clicks and
Yeah.
a bunch of steps. And it's like, oh, because you did that efficiency, it's like now it's like not a game worth playing. It's like, well, what about all the other like myriad of creative decisions I took? Like
Yeah.
it just it's so generalized that I don't know why I'm getting heated. I don't want to get heated. Like I'm trying to be partial, or impartial, but although I'm clearly a bit partial, but not as a game developer, but just as a person who's fascinated with the technology.
Yeah.
I just don't think people deserve that. I don't think game studios deserve that, and I think we should allow this technology to breathe and have open discussions about it instead of, like you say, just everything being black and white.
I think one of the things that need to happen is that we need to create an example of something that ended up really good without the mention of AI to some degree, and then see what people think of it. And if it looks as the quality it is, I think Expedition 33, I mean, did that example already, right? They never mentioned AI, right? But the game was good. It was getting good ratings. But then when someone mentions AI, then it's like, well, I mean, what can you do? I mean, that in this current landscape, it's going to be that reaction, and you're going to have to expect it. But it is a good example mentioning that making something as quality as it is for that game is a good example of what you can do when you're using AI. It's just that in its limited form of what you're doing it for, like if it's just for one concept or something like that, sure. I mean, like it's like what's that going to do for the rest of the game? It's not going to do much, but just help with the visual direction of it. that's really what the context some people should be understanding, but it's not really understood at this point. It needs to be clarified. Um, Even Hollywood's actually getting into this too, if you didn't notice too.
Oh, I
Um,
noticed. Unreal.
yeah,
Unreal's
so
in every
yeah,
like a lot of Netflix movies are using Unreal now. I started pointing it
yeah.
out like right there. I was like, look, I'm telling my flatmate, you see that dog? That's not a real dog. It's a totally animated dog right there. Um,
So
but yeah.
when they use AI too, like if they're gonna start mentioning that using AI, we'll see what the results are gonna be for that. I mean, if it's gonna be quality stuff that, I wouldn't even know this was done in AI, and then that's already a good win in itself, right? Uh, that's the examples we're gonna have to need to see at this point. It's like when CG was getting really big, right? And people would like to say, "Oh, well, we could tell this is CG, right?" But if you don't know if it was done by CG, then they did a good job, right? So,
I was gonna, yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Like a good AI means you can't notice it. Like a good magician, you're not gonna tell that it's a trick. You're gonna just see it as magic or just as real. And that's the bar we need to reach. Like it has to look real. But in
mhm.
order to do that, I mean, I've played around plenty with AI. It's not going to one shot anything. I don't know if
No,
we'll
it's
ever get
not.
to the point where it's going to be able to one shot. I think people really underestimate like how complex like modeling Ellie from Last of Us and putting her through that environment that is exactly what Druckmann and the whole vision of kind of the style of that game, like getting that right. I don't think AI is going to one shot it. I don't even think
Yeah.
like training it for like years is going to be able to one shot it. But instead of needing 500 artists to build that game like an army, you maybe just need 100, and maybe everyone can work like a couple more decent hours, and then those other 400 super talented people can go off and build loads of other great games. And like where everyone, I don't know, maybe I'm being way too optimistic, but I see empowerment and not replacement. I just see people being able to do more. I hope that's the case. I hope I'm right, because I don't
Well,
want to be wrong.
we'll see how that goes because now we're getting to that point where resource and pricing is starting to get to a point where these AI companies are going to have to start charging a little bit more.
Oh yeah,
And
that's
and
coming.
and when that's going to happen, now how's that going to be cost effective
Yeah,
in the long
yeah.
run? So, there's going to be that's going to be happening, and that could be just the beginning of that bubble that's going to burst at some point. But we'll see how that goes. I see a little bit of a pinch of that expense when I was working with AI for my prototype, so I can see this actually ballooning even more so when a lot of people start using it as well. So,
And what happens when AI gets too expensive, and at that point, studios need to rehire. But
yeah.
now they've realized that an artist who's a great artist that is equipped with a good knowledge of how to use AI will be able to do the work of maybe 3 or 4 people. And so it's like, great, let's just hire that AI artist. And then the ones that never chose to apply AI within their workflows then no longer get considered, because I mean, we're in a capitalist system. Like companies
Yeah.
are trying to go for efficiency and talent. If they can have both, they'll choose both. Um,
Mhm.
so
Yeah,
it's
that's what it sounds like, right? Where later on down the line, someone has to be a little bit more open to AI in the workflow, and it could be that. I mean, that could be a future. I don't know if that's the case. If AI does a really good job though on that sort of thing, but if you're the person who's open to it and learning how it works, I think it's a good next step to really see what that could be versus waiting last minute and trying to figure things out. Because I think
yeah.
that's something that you should be preparing for anyway, because it sounds like it's something that it's going to be. It sounds like AI is going to be here for the long run. Doesn't sound like it's going to be gone like the days of 3D glasses in theaters or whatever. But uh, we'll see. But more so that I can do the exploration now, since I know what that process is, and I can figure out whether or not this is going to work for me. Um, but that's something I would love to document as well, and maybe share publicly as well as I'm going through this journey. I'll probably do some devlogs when I'm working on my prototype to really show what my journey is on this.
Oh yeah, that'd be amazing. I mean, exactly what you're saying. I don't think this takes away from what it means to be an artist. I think there's a big responsibility on artists who are coming into the industry or maybe training right now, going through school, to like still learn to draw, still draw stuff on your own, like come
Oh,
up with your own style. What you
yes.
like, you color, look at color theory, look at proportions and sizing, and all these like tenets of artistry. Because if you think, oh, I'm going to become a game artist and I'm just going to cut all the corners with AI, like you're going to be in for a bad time. I'm not advocating for that. I'm advocating for very talented artists to use this technology and just do insane work that otherwise would take you months to do and you can do in days. And I'm for it, but that's me.
Yeah, there is that concern, like, for the next generation, um, if AI becomes part of that lifestyle now, is that we may lose some of that foundational learning because now they're using AI in the very younger stages of life or things like that. If we focus on making sure they still learn their foundations, I think that would be still beneficial on still. Like we can't ignore that because otherwise having the AI just do it for you is not going to be the right approach later on down the line. So, so yeah, you brought up a good point about having that foundational skills, established first, and making sure that talent is focused and harnessed to really utilize AI for what it is.
Yeah, I truly think it's paramount. What it what excites you the most about where art or the industry is heading in the next 5 to 10 years? Like what excites you? Maybe it can be on a general level, like games, maybe just like the art craft. Like what gets you up and still wants you to keep working in games?
I think one of the things that I look forward to seeing is whether or not we can really streamline the art workflow, or at least for the pipeline that for that matter, really get something off the ground to be part of the process of game dev. Because at some point we're gonna be accelerating our game production timelines to some degree. Um, and having to utilize any new emerging tech, whether it be AI or something new that comes out of comes to the picture. It's really just a matter of making sure that we utilize the tech as much as we can to create something in a very meaningful manner and a more efficient manner too, by the way. So, it'll be exciting to see what we can do for art at that point. I think one of the things too that if it comes to a point where we kind of break down some of the steps where we start off a concept in 2D, and then whether it be 3D or 2D for the game, that goes into fruition really quick. That's something I would love to see happening. That way, there's a lot of steps like really skip, but in the same time, the direction stays as it should be. It doesn't for that matter. Sometimes it will deviate from its course if you go through so many iterations. I would love to see if something happens that way, but again, having to create that infrastructure of keeping styles and references local is a big thing. And if we can get to that point, we can do that. We can establish that really quick. That's really exciting for me to see. I would love to see that happening. That way, the way we do art, in the future would be much more quicker, and we can get to a quicker iteration of what the game's going to be right away, so you can get things started. Because a lot of things can happen. I know for AAA, it's really convoluted mess when it comes to like organizing so many things, aspects of the game because we want it to be in that quality. Even for indies too, it's just having to how you're going to budget to something that what you want for that game is going to be very, very important. And how you do that in a timely manner, if you're doing it through a publisher, is going to be much more important. And and with the budget as well, by the way, too. So having to have that new tech emerge to really make art creation quicker would be the way to go. Again, more meaningful for that is like for persons to really have the human element to really be part of that design.
Do you have any advice for any artists? I mean, you've given great advice over the podcast, but I as kind of a closing kind of advice for an artist who's listening and amongst all the things you've said today, like what would you suggest for someone who wants to break into the industry?
So if you're an artist and you're breaking into industry, there's a couple things I would say. First is to decide what you like doing as an artist. We have disciplines in art now that's broken down. You have characters, you have environments. There's also 2D concepts, by the way. A lot of people will, do really well just doing 2D concept art, which is fine. But you need to focus on what you really like doing and really harness that passion of doing that. Otherwise, don't be following like trends that make more sense that you can get a job this way. I wouldn't say that would be the great way to go, but more so of just being good at your craft, at what you like doing is probably the better benefit than actually trying to learn every single thing. And for me, it is, I kind of regretted this myself as from the very beginning, is that I didn't really concentrate on what I like doing. But I finally decided, I need to get into games. I need to be an artist in games, and I need to learn what it takes to be an artist. So I've been really good at drawing. I've been really good at sculpting. I've been able to do that stuff to really take that and actually use it to really just get in that industry, whether it be a texture artist or a 3D modeler, right? So if you're good at those things, then make sure you utilize that as much as you can and really refine that. Um, this day and age, though, it's very competitive, I would say. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this as much, but because of the layoffs, there is competition you're gonna have to face. A lot of people are experienced, so now it's just a matter of trying to create a portfolio that meets the quality of what that studio that you're applying for. So the research you're gonna have to put there is what the studio really wants to see, not something generic. And I don't like it when student or like for instance schools, they tell you to be more of a generalist to some degree. I mean, that's fine and all, but it's not going to really get you farther than maybe people just looking at your portfolio and not really care about it much, because then the next person's probably be more focused than anything. So it really is more so of making sure that you harness your skills and you get to the quality that the studio is going to look at. If it's going to be a 2D art, then look at what the 2D art they've been making for some of their games and start making a portfolio kind of um, focused onto that. And that way they'll see what they want to see. They'll see what what they care for more than just like supplemental stuff that doesn't relate to their games. So those are the things that I would say would be advisable for someone who's jumping in. It does create some work. Obviously, there's going to be some time you have to put in, but in the long run, once you start getting to the point where you do some really good quality work, then people will start talking to you, and it could open opportunities. Realistically, though, keep trying to network as much as you can. And I mean it. It means going to like conferences. I went to GDC this year. I was in the portfolio review program, and a lot of people coming in and showing up portfolios, and I was getting advice. Take advantage of those kind of events, and because those people that are there to review have time set in place to look at your stuff. Um, it's hard enough that if you network and some people wouldn't really care about looking at stuff and you're asking them to do it right then and there. That's a hard part. But going to an event where people are setting their time aside to really look at your work or at least give advice to where you need to go, those are things that you should take advantage of for sure. But networking, even for other things, like I know the International Game Developers Association, they have chapters in different cities that hold events, whether it be mixers or workshops. Take advantage of those too, if there's any that you have in your town or city.
And I'll add quickly, if you're thinking of going to a conference, let's say like a GDC where Emma and I met, you don't have to pay the ticket. Everyone's hanging around in the pubs, at the park.
Yeah,
Go
yeah, you can
there,
do that.
find people on LinkedIn, find out who's going, kind of hustle your way into a meeting, and then show them your portfolio. Is my advice if someone's young and they don't have the cash to drop like $2,000 for an event, which I think hopefully the events start addressing that for young people, because
Oh yeah.
I don't think that's a great way of bringing them in. I mean, I was lucky enough to get a free ticket to go to GDC, which is why we met. So it,
Nice.
it makes you think. But I think that's all really great advice, Emmer. I want to really thank you for coming on the show. It's been great to chat, and I hope we can keep talking about this. I'm keen to hear about your development journey at some point
Awesome. No, yeah.
with
Well,
AI.
thank you for having me.